Hey guys, I'm actually sitting today for this lecture because I want to make sure that I can see the image of the sarcomere in your packet and make sure I get all the spots, all the important structures talked about. So I'm sitting so I can see it a little bit better. I sat for the first couple videos and it was boring. I don't like to teach sitting down. But as I'm looking at the picture of the sarcomere in your notes for today, I'm seeing how detailed it is and want to make sure that I hit everything when I talk about it. The sarcomere is the contractile unit of muscle, and the function of muscle is to contract. That's like the thing. That's what this is all about. If I look at the top picture, it's a 3D image of a muscle cell to remind you that it is cylindrical, is ovalish, kind of. It's like a relay stick. At the bottom, I have a molecular level picture, showing only the interaction of the filaments. And we're going to go over what's in these pictures today. At the top, you can see that muscle fiber has light and dark stripes on it. We use the word striated to describe it. Striated means striped or banded, and it's because if you think of the structure of a muscle cell, it's made up of alternating thick and thin filaments, and it's logical. Thin filaments are lighter in color, thick filaments are darker, and if you get a region where they overlap, it's darker yet. If you draw a couple thin pencil lines on a paper, they're going to be light in color. If you really crank into that paper and draw thick lines, they'll be darker in color. And if you cross-hatch your lines, if you draw some this way, and then you go over them at just a little different of an angle, or you just keep going over the same spot, you're going to get a darker color. And that's how filaments in muscle cells work. The thinner ones are lighter in color than the thicker, and the more filaments you have overlap, especially if they're thick filaments, the darker of a color you'll see, and that's where the stripe comes from. The top picture only labels the M line and the Z disc. These structures have something in common. If you look at the bottom picture now, sarcomeres run from Z line to Z line. I did not listen when my high school anatomy teacher talked. That was not a good thing. I just did not listen. It was senior year, and she and I had a run-in about cricket in the gym not being a very good game to play. She was also the one that I ran my 14-minute mile my sophomore year running backward, telling her that the more she yelled, the slower I'd run. So I had her for anatomy my senior year, and this is one of the only things I remember her saying. Sarcomeres run from Z line to Z line. I don't know why I remember that, but it's really important. It's called a Z-disc in this picture, and that's fine. Disc is probably a better word because it is a three-dimensional structure and lines are flat. So I just always say Z-line because if you look at the surface markings on a cell, it's a line. It doesn't matter which one you call it. So for Z-line to Z-line, when I talked in the last lecture about it being more efficient for 50 rubber bands connected together to each shorten, rather than one large one, that's what a sarcomere does. Each sarcomere shortens independently rather than the muscle itself trying to shorten from one end to the other. So you have a bunch of little units shortening, which makes the whole process more efficient. The Z-lines are important because this is where your actin filaments attach. If you look at that picture, the yellow actin filaments are anchored on the Z disc. That's important. The M line, and I told you in the first picture that they had something in common, the M line is where the thick filaments anchor. If you look at your lower picture, the M line looks like a chain link with the myosin filaments, the thick filaments coming off, and you can see why those are thick filaments versus the thin filaments that are attached to the Z disc. The thick filaments are thicker, and the thin filaments are thinner. Those are good names. Remember, the thick filaments are made of myosin, and those are the myosin heads you see. And if you looked really closely at the thin filaments, you'd see the little spherical actin that we'll look at again tomorrow. So the A band, and these are marked below the bottom picture. The A band is the length of your myosin filaments, the length of your thick filaments. It doesn't change. The myosin filaments don't change in length. You might be thinking, well, then how does the sarcomere get shorter? The region of overlap changes. Those little globs on the end of myosin grab onto actin and pull it past. If you've ever pulled in a garden hose hand over hand, it works like that, almost like a tug of war, but myosin wins. It pulls the actin past it, so the two outer edges of your cell are pulled inward. From the Z lines, they're pulled in. The I band is an area where only the thin filaments are. If you look at that picture, the I band is sort of out towards the edge where the Z disc is, and your H zone is where there are only thick filaments. So what's going to change as my muscle cell contracts is the size of the I band and the H zone. If you'll see, it says zone of overlap on that bottom picture. That's literal. It's where thick and thin filaments overlap. And as the thick filaments pull the thin filaments past them, the zone of overlap increases. And both the I band and the H zone shrink because they lose area to the zone of overlap. The areas where only one kind of filaments are decrease as the filaments themselves overlap more. Muscle cells shorten or contract by increasing the overlap. That's your big idea. Sarcomeres run from Z line to Z line. They're the contractile unit of the muscle, and they contract by pulling thin filaments past thick and increasing the zone of overlap. We're going to look at that again next time with our intro to contraction and talk more about the mechanism it happens by, looking more at how myosin works on that. We're coming up on probably the toughest thing in this chapter with the how behind that, the sliding filament theory of muscle contraction. It's the toughest thing for a lot of people most years. So I've got my video planned for that as well as some other online resources to help you guys see animations of how it works and get a better idea. But that's all I've got for today. My take-home message of the sarcomere running Z-line to Z-line is there, and some pictures for you to check out as far as the zone of overlap. So have a great day and see you next time.